Hey everybody, welcome back. We're going to look at documentation for level designers, which is an extension of technical writing for games. So if you haven't watched that video, please go check that out. That'll help you understand some of the things that you're going to be applying here. When working with a level design document, you're going to express information through the context of the level, particularly in these four contexts: experiential, narrative, gameplay, and environmental. Depending on the scope of your game, these may be very small, these may be insignificant or irrelevant, but these are the general four ways in which you're going to express the details of a level. So looking at experiential design, you're talking about player behaviors. These are the things that players do that you can observe, they can actually perform inside of the world. So the entry behaviors are what they should know before the experience, and learned behaviors are what they gain during the experience of your level. So if you were working within a larger game, your entry behaviors may have a list of learned behaviors from previous levels, saying the player should know how to use the hook shot and throw a bomb and collect rupees, right? And so the idea of an entry behavior at the very beginning of a game is probably something to the extent of players have a conventional knowledge of WASD movement or third-person camera controllers or whatever it is that you think is necessary, and that becomes an assumed behavior moving forward into the future levels. So experiential context establishes what the player can do, will do, or should do, but it doesn't necessarily put that into why or what they're doing with that information. The narrative context is going to help to establish the player's purpose in the world. So the impetus is why are they there? What connects them to the space? What establishes them inside of the world? If you think about games like Call of Duty that have multiple fronts in their campaign, that you take on the role of multiple characters, they start off each level by re-establishing who the character is and what they're doing inside of the space that they're at. This helps to allow for orientation for the player to think clearly about who they are supposed to be in the world, allowing for better immersion. And then you need to establish throughout the level what the interests are. So in the document, you're going to want to address things like the player story progression. Who are they talking to? What are they being told? What's being revealed to them in terms of their understanding of the world or the clarity of the things that they know. And then you're going to conclude that document in terms of addressing narrative components by discussing what's going to happen next, either implying the next story beat that's handled cinematically, or implying the next level, or bringing the game to a conclusion. But the implication is going to be addressed inside of the narrative of the document to say, here is what is next or what doesn't happen next, to help establish for what's going to be built to show the player the experience is concluding or transitioning to a new thing. For the gameplay component, you want to establish the hype. So this is getting the player excited about what's going to be happening. So if you're jumping off the top of a mountain and you're going to squirrel suit down the mountain into an enemy secret lab, right? So the idea is that you're showing this vast view, and you're going to demonstrate to the player. Someone shoots down the hill, and you're like, holy crap, they just jumped down a mountain, but they didn't die, right? And then the guy says, well, it's your turn, and they push you off the mountain, right? So they've established something that gives you an expectation of what's going to happen, and then they put you into it. The hook would be the teaching, training, and testing of whatever else is going on during gameplay. So if the experiential system told you that you could, shoot an arrow, then the hook inside of that is going to be, hey, go pick up that bow, go shoot at that target. All right, now these enemies are coming through the door. Shoot at the enemies, and then you get the specific contextualization of what the player is going to do. But like, okay, now that you've taken care of those enemies with our support, you need to go out there and fight the ringleader, and then that's going to be testing the player's knowledge. Or understanding of the system as they go out there. If you're in an earlier part of the game, tutorialization, sometimes these are less distinct. Training and testing look very similar. Most games start off with something like, hey, move around, look up and down, crouch to get under this log, and jump to get over that one. Those are testing, but it's just remedial. But you're still going to have to describe that inside of your documentation to explain what the player is doing with the ability that they can jump and they can duck, which are the experiential contexts, and the gameplay is jumping over logs and crouching under logs. And then you're also going to want to establish the cliffhanger. So this is the apex activity that, to the best extent that they can express whatever skill set they've learned, how does this lead to a conclusion of the space? Have they properly resulted in successful progression through the level, or have they failed in their execution? And so gameplay, how do you handle the transition from doing cool things to waiting for the next thing to happen? And then the environmental context is just establishing the world around the player. So how is the world presented to the player? By camera context, are you showing them cinematically? Is there something that they can perceive? Is there a sense that they have about the world that they need to be told about, so they can get that thing that comes out of the game that isn't diegetically conveyed to them? And then content, what's the style of the world? What's the architecture, the decorations, the color palettes, the vitality? Are there particle effects that are showing dust or falling leaves? Is there a crowd the player has to navigate through? This is the establishing of the tangible components of the world as the players can be able to perceive it. And then for continuity, in terms of how that world is presented to the player, is there lively audio, is there dialogue going on, is the lighting bright and vibrant, is it guiding the player, or is it just establishing the world as this ambient element that the player is existing in? And then you're relating all that to the player in terms of their role and purpose there for active gameplay. So with all these things, these four contexts, the experiential, the narrative, the gameplay, and the environmental context, what you don't want to do is list that in your level design document as four different contexts, because realistically, some of those are going to be fairly redundant. So what you might do is in a rough draft is list out the contexts as you understand them in almost like a bullet form. And then you're going to write these into a summary, a progression, an overview, a map, and if needed, annotations. This is going to take some of those things and you're going to aggregate them together to give a holistic view that's easy to digest for any developer that's going to be reading through your content. So don't make arbitrary sections by naming the context. Those are just the four contexts that you should be aware of. So first thing you're going to throw down is a summary. Briefly establish the place, typically by name and adjective description. Players start atop a snowy mountain, stepping out of a utility van and seeing a vast valley before them, right? So I'm establishing that. I haven't told you how big the mountain is, how far away they are, the grittiness of the truck they came out of, whatever. I'm just briefly giving them that context. A brief note about the purpose of the player being there. All right, rookie, it's your turn. You're up. We're heading down to the facility, right? That's going to be what happens to the player. A brief note in the summary is players are prompted by an NPC that they'll be going down the mountain in a squirrel suit, right? That's the brief note. A brief comment about the activities the player performs. This is as players navigate around obstacles and engage in mid-air firefights. I don't know what this game is, but as they do that, then you're gonna briefly describe that they're going to be doing those things as they go down. So you're describing the experiential and the gameplay context as part of the narrative, why they're going down, what they're going to be doing while they're down there, and a brief comment about how it concludes. As players arrive at the facility, the cinematic plays, introducing them to the breach sequence that allows them to enter the facility on foot. Okay. You notice the theme with each of these instructions is that it is a brief establishing a brief note, a brief comment. The summary should probably be no more than 3 to 6 sentences. If you have a really huge level, maybe a little bit longer. But that's a summary of the type of thing that the player is going to be doing, so that someone who's looking at the rest of the level, they could read the summary and then jump down further in the document and get an idea of where the information they're looking at fits into the overall gameplay experience. Then you'll have a progression section. So this is the place where you get step-by-step actions for the player. If you're making a linear game, this is literally an enumerated list of just saying player does this, then this, then this, then this. They do A, then B, then C, then D. This describes what the player must do in order to be successful. So it's just the roadmap of how they get from point A to point B. If you have a nonlinear experience, then this might look a little bit more amorphous, where you say, hey, the players need to accomplish 5 objectives within this environment, and there's 23 things they could do. Then you list out, here are all the things they could do, and you provide some context as to what the player must do in order to progress to the next mission cycle or whatever it is you have them doing. And then the overview, if your level is fairly remedial, like a racing game, or it's a combat game where like players do this, you might describe like the waves of combat. Or if you have the racing game, you just say players proceed through checkpoints until they complete 3 laps. The overview can be very simple in a game like that, but if you have a game that has the player going through staged activities that have different requirements or actions within them, then this looks a little bit more like a game design document in that you have subsections and formatting that allow you to describe different types of things. If you're introducing new NPCs, you address the dialogue that happens during gameplay, the challenges, the puzzles, you describe different components that the player is going to be interacting with. And so the overview can be quite more robust. And then you'll have a map, right? And so the map comes after the majority of the other content because it is really just contextualizing the placement, scale, and orientation of those elements that you've previously described. So the map should help to bring everything together. If you look at the map without the rest of the details, you might be able to infer some relevant context, but not maybe build the level as intended. And if you read the rest of the content without the map, then maybe you could build a level that does the right kind of things, but not at the scale or proportion or orientation that the original designer had intended. So the map will include a couple components, the title for the level, the labels for the spaces, a grid allowing for uniform interpretation of size, a scale to allow that size to be attributed to real-world development units that are going to be used by the developer, a legend to help establish a relationship between gameplay components and their placement in the world, a critical path showing where you think the player would go under an ideal circumstance, architecture showing positive and negative space, what's traversable, what's not, what's going to obscure the player's path, and then gameplay references if there's things like checkpoints, spawn points, things like that you'll just add those in, typically attached to the legend, but sometimes you have things that are separate from that. And all of this really, in the way that's implemented, is detailed enough to warrant another video, so expect that to come down the pipe in a little bit here. Annotations are the only writing element that should come after the map, and they're not even required. The only reason you would have annotations is if you're going to represent content about the map that couldn't be clarified through the preceding details in all of the overview and summary and progression, and it would prevent you from needing to draw another map. Typically, this is some change temporally, like you cross a bridge and then you do something and the bridge blows up, but you can't cross the bridge back on the way over, so you put an annotation, a big A over the bridge, and then in the annotation after the map it says, once players complete objective, explode fuel supply, right? Bridge collapses and players must navigate back to the escape using a different route, right? So I could draw a map that says here's the before explosion map, and then another map here's the after explosion map, or I could just write an annotation. So consider that annotations being optional. They should be detailed enough to explain what changes without having to be a thorough paragraph that's explaining new content. If you have a deep enough annotation, you're probably warranting a separate map. It's worth noting that as you work with level design documents, working on a solo level design document, of course, you can consider that the experience is going to be self-contained, so you don't need to reference anything else. Your validation of player content and behavior for the player controller is completely self-directed. You don't need to relate it to something else. If something feels off, you change it in the player controller. In a large game, you obviously don't have that luxury. So understanding what things get written into the level design document as a one-off level, you have less clarity to the systems in the document, which means that the level design document isn't sufficient to make it as a complete game, but it also affords you the latitude of kind of creative editing while you're developing. If you're working in a larger team, of course, you have to reference the things established in the systems and mechanics of the GDD as you progress forward, but it also creates some guidelines for you, so you're not creating from scratch. You're creating within the context of how high can the player jump, how far does the player move at the speed when they're sprinting, and then you can build a level kind of around those guidelines. So it has positives and negatives, pros and cons. Just be mindful of those considerations. It's also worth looking at here for this, just a quick example of what some of the written sections might look like. If we have a level, we're going to apply some of our technical writing best practices, but the summary does not have to be very detailed, right? Players start off in a sandy back alley looking at a corridor past a fountain towards a busy street with the audio of someone calling to them for water, right? And so we have the idea of what they're doing, what the purpose is. We get to the progression, player starts in the alley, moves to the fountain, fills a bucket, places the first bucket on the ramp, finds the second bucket, right? And so this like goes through, as they get through to the end of this, then they'll come through and the level will end. The overview is going to describe a little bit more about the orientation of the space. They're on the west cap of a courtyard. As they come through, we're discussing that there's north and south rooms that have different buckets in them, and as they get through, then they progress to the end. I describe here in the environmental subsection of the overview. Overview has a gameplay section and an environmental section. So here, sandstone mosaic architecture has Moroccan styling with rundown aesthetic. The fountain is more ornate, but the rooms feel as though they've been repurposed as makeshift sleeping quarters. So what I do is I have a reference art here. I say this is a reference image showing mosaic details, architecture material, and color, and ornate fountain. So I can see, okay, this is what my sandstone's going to look like. I'm looking for mosaic details that will reflect this type of style, and then I'm looking for a fountain that will have this type of detail. If I'm working with an artist, they can generate the content that's along these lines, and if I'm not, then I can look for an asset kit that will allow me to build out this styling. And then here, another reference art showing density of population, alley canopy covering, and density. So I can get an idea of what I want the spaces to look like, referencing real-world things that will guide me as a level designer on how to build those effectively. I don't have the maps in place yet, but I expect that to come through in a future video. I hope this has helped to establish what you should be doing with your design, with your documentation, and how you communicate with other developers, how you formalize and articulate your ideas. I hope it's given you some inspiration in how to approach work that you're working on for a specific project or a collaboration that you're doing. And whatever it is, I hope that you keep building.